exhibition and a collaboration with Herajac Gallery. At the Art Center, we always try in January to do more of a community-based exhibition, get everybody out from the dull days of January. And this was just so wonderful to work with Barbara and Mara and Alexandra and Jocelyn and everyone from Hera. I've always been a big fan, so to bring them here to the Jamestown Art Center has just been a real joy, and very easy installation and whole process, which is not always the case. So we're just so happy to have everybody here tonight, and this is Barbara Page, who will be talking to you about the artist activism, and we'll move on from there. Thank you.
We would like to thank the Jamestown Art Center for hosting this exhibition. Can everyone hear me okay? Because I'd like to do, no? You can't hear me okay? All right, let me. Professor. Okay. Okay, I'll take it. I'm hoping I can coordinate reading on the mic and advancing the images, but. Okay, is that better?
Yeah. Sorry.
Wow. Mara Trachtenberg was going to speak first, but she was not feeling well tonight. So as a way of introduction, first of all, I've been a member of Hera since 1985. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of when I started working with Hera. But in 1974, a group of women artists opened a gallery. So this is what I'm worried about, coordinating. Oops, I pointed that way. Okay. Opened a gallery in a former laundromat on Main Street in Wakefield. Founding member Roberta Richmond, who's here, has said, "We thought we would last a year. 45 years later, we are still thriving. Hera has evolved from a traditional artist cooperative to an artist-run space overseen by a board of directors that includes artists and community members. Hera was one of the first women's cooperatives galleries in the U.S. and is unusual in its location." I have to point it this way. I'll get used to this in a couple of minutes. Its location in a non-urban setting. Besides seeking a place where women have an equal opportunity to exhibit their work and exchange ideas and information, the founders were committed to increasing the community's awareness and exposure to art. Today, Hera's artist membership includes artists of any gender at all stages of their careers. A significant organizational accomplishment is our longevity and ability to adapt to the changing needs of our artist community. We went from a traditional cooperative gallery where all members served on the board of directors to a board that consists of artist member volunteers and also members of the wider community. Although men always participated in exhibitions at Hera, to be more inclusive, we began accepting men as artist members in the 1990s. Because of Hera's commitment to exhibitions of high artistic merit and integrity, we have been awarded numerous grants from the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts, Rhode Island Council on the Humanities, Rhode Island Foundation, the Puffin Foundation, and the Champlin Foundation. Hera was invited to participate in the non-governmental forum on women of the 4th United Nations World Conference in Beijing, and is referenced in 2 textbooks used in art history and women's studies programs, Expanding Circles, Women, Art, and Community, and the Power of Feminist Art. So I just started out with some archival photographs. In 2009, Alexandra Brockus and I were invited to take part in the symposium, Systems of Sustainability, Art, Innovation, Action at the University of Houston. Parts of this talk are adapted from our presentation there. From the beginning, Hera has shown through individual and curated shows socially conscious and political work encouraging ethnic and cultural diversity in both audience and program development. We encourage artists and their audience to explore contemporary cultural, social, and aesthetic issues. As we have honed our mission statement over time, this has remained at the core. All of these exhibitions, too, were really come out of ideas of artist members. It's one of the, I think, real perks of membership. Besides showing your own work, you can also have ideas for exhibitions. And we do 2 to 3 shows that are juried around a theme or curated around a theme a year. Photographer Marianne Nielsen joined the gallery in 1986. In addition to exhibiting her own work on the politics of women's work, she and art historian Kristen Engberg curated the invitational Bearing Witness Artists Respond to AIDS in May of 1988. This show was one of the earliest exhibitions to deal with the crisis. Many artists were still hesitant or unable yet to express their reaction to AIDS in their work. The curators had to go beyond Rhode Island to obtain work and include pieces by artists from New York and California. It was an extraordinary exhibit with works in various media, both documentary and very personal pieces. Nielsen's second exhibition in November 1990 was Sexuality and the Politics of Obscenity, a photographic invitational with works by 14 artists, 11 women and 3 men, including Laura Aquilar, Deborah Bright, Diane Newmeyer, and Joe Smoke. At a time when Mapplethorpe's work was under fire, Nielsen chose to address the questions surrounding sexuality, obscenity, and freedom of expression, depicting, she said in an interview, a viewpoint different from that of the white male heterosexual. Nielsen created the frieze you see in the slide, consisting of pages torn from magazines that went around the room at ceiling height above the other work. One reviewer commented, "It is startling to see how truly obscene," and she gives Webster's definition, "offensive to modesty or decency. Most of the ads are in comparison to the tender, intimate, funny, and ironic work that is displayed." Oops. A little bit of a delay. There we go, okay. Grace Bentley Sheck, gallery member and printmaker, and Sylvia Gutchin, photographer and gallery administrator, curated the invitational Homes Homelessness. The exhibit included drawings and a model for a women's shelter by architect Troy West that you see here, as well as works in a wide variety of media. With funding from the Rhode Island Foundation, we published a catalog which included poetry, an essay by Peter Marcuse, then professor of urban planning at Columbia University, and a report and recommendation by the Task Force on Homelessness from the Office of the Governor of the United Way of Southeastern New England. In her introduction, Bentley Sheck wrote, "The Homes Homelessness exhibition intends to raise consciousness of the effects of homelessness on the social fabric and the diversity of the homeless population by juxtaposing images of their condition with works that seek the essence of home." I think I need some technical help. The slides, the images disappeared.
Teddy?
here is from Peggy Diggs' 1992 exhibition of works from her domestic violence project. Diggs was disturbed by stories of abuse she heard from her students, and after reading Angela Brown's 1987 book, When Battered Women Kill, she began a body of work on domestic violence. As a result of her interviews with women in prison, she felt she had to bring her message outside of the gallery context to the general public and to women directly, women who did not think of themselves as abused and did not know how or where to seek help. She created this billboard with the words, "Does he hurt you?" depicting an abused woman and a phone number to call for help. It was put up on several billboards in Western Massachusetts. She teaches at Williams College. One of the women she interviewed had said to her, "There ought to be work done on bread wrappers and milk cartons or cigarette packs." Sorry, I'm having a little trouble advancing these. Those are things that most everyone buys on a regular basis. In collaboration with Tuscan Dairy of Union, New Jersey, Diggs produced 1.5 million milk cartons with a graphic image of a large silhouetted hand on one side, along with a few questions such as, when you argue at home, does it always get out of hand? And a phone number to call. The cartons went out over a 2-week period. In conjunction with the exhibition, the gallery co-sponsored a panel discussion on the subject with what is now the Domestic Violence Resource Center. This installation by Genera Banzon was shown in the exhibition Adjustments of Status, the Immigrant Experience in Contemporary Art, curated by painter and Hera artist Hyun Higby Chang. The exhibit featured work by Banzon, Yukuko Burns, Hyun Higby Chang, Sanford Lee, Munir Dashini Mohammed, and Arnold Prince. As the press release for the show explained, the title of the exhibition is derived from a legal term used by the United States Immigration Service. When an alien receives permanent residency, the procedure is called adjustment of status. Unfortunately, as Chang points out, sometimes that adjustment is to that of a second-class citizen. Genera Banzon was born in the Philippines. The subject of Banzon's installation, titled A Journey, is the phenomenon of mail-order brides, young women who are sent away to new husbands, in this case to Europe and the US. We see in the center, on a bed-sized traditional weaving, the silhouette of a woman lying on her back. Above her are suspended Sunday supplement ads from American newspapers. Behind that, on either side, is text printed on typing paper with only 5 or 6 words on each page. The text of childhood memories reads in a continuous loop like obsessive memories. And this is one of the series of paintings by Munir Dashini Mohammed, originally from Ghana, a painter, muralist, and art educator who now lives in Providence. Thanks. Hera artist members Troy West and Claudia Flynn curated a series of exhibitions, Artists Defend the Environment Under Siege in 2001, American Democracy Under Siege in 2003, and Waging Peace in 2006. American Democracy Under Siege received support from the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities, What is Freedom Grant, RISCA, and the Verizon Foundation. In the catalog, the curators wrote, "A government has come to power that daily, systematically is dismantling the cornerstone of democracy in America, the Bill of Rights. The land of the free, home of the brave, has become the land of fear and home of advanced surveillance and security systems." The catalog also contained an essay, Freedom Under Threat, by Paul Buell, a senior lecturer at Brown University. And Anu Matthew, professor of art at URI, wrote, "As we were reeling from the shock of 9/11, some Americans also experienced a backlash of discrimination and hate against immigrants. This backlash shook the foundation of our individual beliefs in the American dream. As a South Asian immigrant, I have been deeply disturbed by these hate crimes directed at Americans who are members of my ethnic community. Sadly, the targeting of new immigrants is nothing new. Girl Art Now, a national juried exhibition in 2004, explored the status of women as subjects and artists. Past director Cynthia Farnell felt the celebration of our 30th anniversary was the perfect time to take a look at what kind of art was being made by and about women at that time. Juror Deborah Bright, professor of photography and art history at the Rhode Island School of Design, selected the work of 64 contemporary artists working in a wide range of media, including site-specific installation, digital video, textiles, painting, photography, and performance. Artists addressed issues of gender roles, identity, body image, family relationships, and sexuality. The opening reception featured performances by the Casilio sisters and the Women's Art Rescue Squad. Alicia Kelly and Sarah Casilio are identical triplets who studied at Mass College of Art. They began working together, developing live encounters in which they used themselves as tools to express ideas about identity and politics. They performed a piece at the opening called the Compatibility Quiz, in which they appear and interact with the crowd as three distinctly different personalities. The mission of the Women's Art Rescue Squad is to aid women in art crisis by providing a network of support through portfolio reviews, critiques, exhibition and publications opportunities, and maintaining an art community within a nurturing and constructive environment. Based in Philadelphia, they made themselves available to perform art rescues, as we see in this slide where they're reviewing Cynthia's portfolio. Crossing Borders in 2008 brings back the issue of immigration as a topic. Hera artist and Peace Corps volunteer John Petula organized this exhibit that was juried by Judith Tannenbaum, curator of contemporary art at the Rizzi Museum. The exhibition addressed issues of immigration, most specifically immigration from the developing nations of the South to the wealthy nations of the North. John wrote, "Artists have the ability to inject new insights into a dialogue that has become polarized. There is clearly a need to move beyond a stance of us against them. It is important that a more nuanced, complex dialogue take place." There was a companion exhibit at the Pawtucket Arts Collaborative and a panel discussion, films, and a puppet show. This piece by Ana Flores was part of a series of sculptures and paintings that examined the history of Spanish colonization, sugar, and her family's own history. Oops, go back. The following four exhibitions that have taken place in the past 4 years are the results of the political climate in this country and a conscious decision on the part of Hera members to focus on feminism and gender. In the National Juried Exhibition Spectrum, Contemporary Artists Exploring Gender in 2016, Hera Gallery explored the ways artists respond to gender identity as a primary facet of human identity. It was juried by J.R. Vertesky, exhibition manager at the New Bedford Art Museum and Artworks. As the understanding of gender identity begins to encompass an expanding spectrum, artists have a much deeper pool to reach in and to react to, including fixed, fluid, cis, trans, non-binary, and all other identities. During the exhibition, there was a reading by the Ocean State poets called "Who Are You? The Poetics of Identity." 6 poets explored the subject of identity from their personal perspectives. Marge Flanders, one of the poets, says, "Knowing who you are is a lifelong pursuit. Obviously, many forces and factors, internal and external, shape our identities. We're hoping that our particular experiences, though not universal, may shed some light on how we have all grappled with discovering who we are as people. The feminist opposition in 2017 was an intersectional exploration of contemporary feminism's role in opposition to the current cultural and political climate, juried by Jessica Hong, curatorial assistant at the Institute of Contemporary Art, Boston. She wrote of the show, "The feminist opposition can be seen as a rallying cry or a call to arms, particularly in light of recent events. The selected works capture the spirit of the show's namesake, but as a whole explores how opposition can be both productive as well as positive. With the saturation of negative news, it is important to remain open and not succumb to that negativity." Photographs complicating our binary views of gender and womanhood works with explicitly political messaging and those that examine the socio-cultural landscape. The feminist opposition celebrates the diversity of artistic output, identities, and perspectives. As one of the most widely dispersed and heavily shared calls, we had submissions from all across the U.S. and welcomed artists of a multitude of genders, race, and identity. With a background in linguistic studies, Dai's artistic practice explores culture through language. In this video performance, a woman sits inside a transparent box while another woman sits on the outside. Both are writing on the box in an ancient Chinese language called Nu Shu. Nu Shu means women's script and is the world's only language created for and used solely by women. After research, Dai learned that the women in China created this language as an act of rebellion against the patriarchy, that by using a language men could not understand, they could freely express themselves and write down what they were thinking and feeling. However, after visiting a museum where the language was still spoken, she learned that women who know the language have been pressured by authorities to stay in the village and perform their cultural activities as entertainment for tourists for menial wages, instead of finding jobs in nearby larger cities for better salaries. Voices Power Action featured 7 Rhode Island artists and was curated by Kay Fumalayo Alero, Aka, Whack Like That. This exhibition was sponsored by the Gender and Women's Studies program at the University of Rhode Island as part of the 2018 Honors Colloquium, Reimagining Gender, Voices Power Action. The exhibition at Herajac Gallery contemplated queerness, feminism, and activism through the intersection of racial and ethnic otherness. The Rhode Island artists exhibiting were Becky Davis, Kyle B. Ricardo de Lima, Shea Rivero, Benito Rios, Garcia Sinclair, and Nafis White. This image is from Becky Davis's piece, part of an interactive intervention series, multimedia installation, and social media project. On August 10, 2018, she began staging interventions on Confederate monuments in 8 locations across Georgia that she once called home. Each structure remains protected by state law. The initial performances consisted of sitting in each monument's shadow while handwriting a series of custom-designed postcards. These cards were sent to every politician with jurisdiction over each public space, urging them to reconsider the law. The documentation of In the Shadow of Dixie has become its own intervention and form of resistance. At Hera, Davis set up a desk with documentation on the walls and audio and postcards the gallery viewers were invited to fill out. I'm sorry I don't have an image to show you what the installation looked like. Yeah. The concept of shame had reached a new level of importance in current events during and after the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. The exhibition Shame explored the term in its many dimensions: shame in relation to power and oppression, the danger of being shameless, the difference in its manifestation in men and women, the way in which different cultures view shame, and shame as an empathy-seeking tool that elevates self-serving judgment. 27 artists from around the country participated in this exhibition, juried by Anna Dempsey, a professor and chairperson of art history at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. The story of No is an interactive installation by Hera member Abigail Womble. It features a large oil-on canvas of a naked woman covering herself, which hangs above a shelf where there is a wooden box in the shape of a vagina and a suspended bag inviting viewers to draw a piece of paper. People are asked to read the line on their paper before opening the box. Among the possible lines drawn are trigger warning, I love you, but no, and maybe later, which are meant to influence the viewer's understanding of permission and consent. Art student Hannah DeWitt, with her body painted white, entered the gallery space and took a classic pose of a woman bathing with a cloth and basin. Then she beckons for a viewer to approach, reaching out to hold their hands and gaze. One by one, gallery viewers approached her to participate in this intense and personal gesture. So this was kind of an edited selection of exhibitions that we've done over the years. There actually were even more. We did a show called Making War in 1992, and then Troy and Claudia had done Waging Peace in 2006. We've also done exhibitions related to the environment, the Tucket River and its environs, the environment under siege, water, and it's amazing as I was putting together this, this presentation to realize that all of these topics are still relevant and we could continue to cycle some of these ideas again and new views on them. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Jocelyn Foy, who's an artist member and founding member of the Women Project. And
hi, my name is Jocelyn. I feel more uncomfortable. Okay, so hi, my name is Jocelyn. I've been a Hera member for about 4 years. And it has been an incredible organization in terms of coming from out of state, being welcomed, and being encouraged to push yourself. And so I will be forever thankful for all that you've done for us, artists who come from out of state. So an amazing thing happened as a part of the creative process. I know so many artists in the audience, but as an artist myself and getting to know a lot of the members, the Woman Project really started as a result of Hera and the community that was around that around Hera. And it really was, I don't want to give him too much credit, but I sort of have to a little bit. But 45 was elected, and it caused a lot of strife, and a lot of us here in the suburbs didn't really understand how we could make an impact quickly. And so Mara, who again was unable to be here tonight, and I, along with a couple others, went to the board of Hera and said, could we start a lecture series where the week after 45 came in, can we bring an immigration lawyer here to talk about what an immigration law community would presume is going to come in our future? And Hera said, please. And so we called it Creating Together, this lecture series. And over the course of, I would argue, about 14 lectures, almost every other week, or every 3 weeks, different specialists came in to speak about different topics, social topics, that could affect the community, or they'd read from what they're hearing as specialists and give us advice in terms of how we could be active. So we fundraised for every one of those organizations who came, or if people couldn't give money, we were looking for ways for people to be active with those organizations, so plugging them in different ways. One of the interesting things that came out of that, though, was the education of some of the things that were specific to our state, not so much at the federal level, but some of the misunderstandings that we had or presumptions that we thought existed and protections that we had. And it caused a number of us to start asking questions about, well, how do we make those changes? And artist history has always been to be the dissonance creators, to be the ones who ask the questions, cause perhaps the trouble. I've often gotten away with saying, well, I'm an artist, that's why I'm doing this. And sometimes it's ironic how I've gotten away with some things. And so I've used that. Around Mara's dining room table, three artists and two much more politically savvy women came together and said, what can we do to cause a new shift in thinking around what we learned was happening around reproductive issues here in Rhode Island. And so we plugged in very quickly and asked Hera, how would you feel if we used the Hera space to start meeting one another? Not necessarily knowing what we were going to do, but said, can we just start meeting as a group of people to talk about our feelings, figure out what it is we could possibly do as community, and go from there? And the greatest gift that Hera gave was not only the beginning of this activist organization, but also creating the community around a group of people who needed to have a voice. And I think that we live in a time when technology takes over so much that we presume that is our voice, but it's sometimes very hollow. So I think that one of the greatest things that we found was we were empowering one another, and we were able to actually forward that motion. Men were not excluded, men often came. We started taking photographs of the community that was showing up, and it got bigger and bigger. Our first major action was January of 2017 as a protest march. It was a dinner march. We went from Hera to the Unitarian Universalist space on the street, and we didn't really, we put the word out that something was gonna happen, and the next thing you knew, 350 people showed up at Hera. And we were like, there is an interest here. And the strike was to bring awareness and the interest of calling attention to our interest of having a voice, demanding attention, and supporting women and basically reproductive rights. But we hadn't necessarily pinpointed it in the public so strongly at that point. So our first major action at the State House was on Mother's Day, and we tried to pick these certain points where we would inspire people to show up. And we started doing things that were gentle touches, like we took cupcakes to all the legislators who were the bill sponsors in the House and the Senate that were supporting what at the time I believe was called the Reproductive Health Care Act. I think it was that early on, is that correct? Okay. And then it took a couple of years for us showing up as a community of folks with food, as thank yous, to really out the folks who were those sponsors, but to also start pinpointing attention to each one of them through different creative processes. So that kind of brings me back to Hera, and that's where we really have had the most success, is that we were a combination of art and activists, and we call ourselves artivists. And we created means to meet people where they were rather than saying, hey, come to someplace that you might not be comfortable. So Emily Boucher, who was one of our members here at Hera as well, and also in the Women Project's core, had this idea of creating a quilt. And the quilt, actually, if we think about it, I wasn't supposed to be talking tonight. A good friend of ours is sick, so she wasn't able to be here. So my notes, I don't have notes. But right before that, we had created, we called it a receipt petition. And we would take this giant, huge piece of paper everywhere. People would sign it, but we didn't have any knowledge of how many people there were. It wasn't easy to carry this giant mass of paper in different places. And so Emily came up with this quilt. And so every square is 7 inches squared. And there's 3 sections of it over to the far right and over on the right side of the projector. And each signature is someone who was asking, we call it a petition quilt, so each piece was a piece of this growing petition. And what we would do is we would go to the State House and we would create the frame. One of our master quilters is here. Judith built these square sections of 64 squares, and it would be carabiner to itself. And we would keep carabinering more and more and more squares. So by the time that we were done, the quilt is as big as 3 ceiling to floor of the 3rd story of the State House down. We're at about 2,500 signatures, which was all individual conversations. So when you think about it from an artist standpoint, you're creating a visual representation of a collective voice. You're also having to have small conversations about what that is, and you developed these relationships. So the projects and the ideas kept coming. People would come to us and say, I have a great idea, I want to try it. We'd say, awesome, how can we support you? And the Women Project worked with folks inside the State House. This piece in the bottom center is Tammy Brown. She was supposed to be here speaking. She is a thespian who works at the CTC. She's the art director there, if you know the Contemporary Theater Company. Anyway, they did a reading of the actual Roe v. Wade legislation. They read the actual piece, and then they read, I believe, the language that was from the RHCA. And so that is in the library of the State House. Some women were clothed, some were half clothed. It caused quite a disturbance in the force. That's not a common thing. Outsiders, I was like, oh, that's great. And people are like, that doesn't happen in Rhode Island. Got a lot of that. We did projections on the State House, and people have asked us to do a projection tour, which we're gonna rally for. I keep telling myself we're gonna rally for that. We do t-shirt projects, we do all sorts of different types of postcarding programs where people are doing that in different ways. And I know I'm missing a ton of stuff. But anyway, the point is that we did this for a couple years, and we built a community that was so great. So many of you in the room were there with us that after 27 years, we helped pass the bill, and it became law because of this action that we as a huge community took on. And so it really happened by somewhat of a non-traditional method paired with some of the traditional methods that you use in activism. So Hera really, to us, has been the beacon of the growth as well as the giving us the confidence to do this thing, but also was the community that we were really able to build from. So in a lot of cases, if it weren't for Hera, we wouldn't be here. But we're one of many organizations that does what Hera does. And that is foster these relationships and these abilities. So without further ado, we have a fancy treat, and that is that for this work that we did, we have the honor of being included in the Pembroke collection of non-binary and feminist history of Rhode Island. That they called us and they said, we'd like to include you in this history. And so we're lucky enough to have the archivist here who's gonna say a few words. She's gonna be we've been giving her all sorts of things that we've made as we go, and she's gonna be she's gonna have the quilt, and that's gonna be treated so that it's gonna be around for many more years to come, rather than living in my garage in a trunk. And so it's gonna be very well treated. But anyway, so without further ado, Mary Murphy.
Let me begin. I just want to say thank you so much for welcoming me here tonight. Hold this real close to me. Just to introduce myself again, my name is Mary Murphy, and I serve, my official title is the Nancy L. Buck Pembroke Center Archivist at Brown University. Nancy is a wonderful woman who helps me do the work that I do, so her name is included in my job. I am responsible at Brown University for curating and making available archival collections that document the history of women and non-binary people at Brown, but also in the state of Rhode Island. And in addition to this, I also curate and make available collections about the lives and work of feminists and queer theorists in the academy. So it's a lot. All of the collections, including the Women Project quilt, which I'm going to speak about, are housed long-term and made available in perpetuity at Brown University's John Hay Library, which, as a Carnegie Library, and very important to the folks at the Women Project, makes the John Hay Library always open to the public. So I welcome all of you to come and visit us and use our collections, including the records of the Women Project. So my story with the Women Project began about a year ago. I contacted the Women Project after following news stories about the progression of the Reproductive Privacy Act through the Rhode Island State House. The Women Project's online presence indicated to me as a curator of women's history that this was a history-making women's advocacy organization that I wanted to know better, that I wanted to know more about. I had a feeling that beyond the advocacy that they were doing and creating, that they were very likely producing archival records of historical importance. So I'm like a shark, I'm always swimming around for those history makers. So this fall, after much conversation with Jocelyn Foy, Jordan Hevenor, and other members of the Women Project, I was thrilled when they decided to take the leap and not only to donate their collection to our archive, some of which is already available for research, but they also asked me to participate in this event to share a few thoughts about the significance in particular of the Women Project quilt being added to the collection as an artistic archival object, as materiality for the study of women's history. So as I consider this topic, what stands out most to me is the evocative power of an artistic object to evidence human experience, to evidence struggle and what happened here, to give a voice to those that others want to silence. In that way, the Women Project quilt continues the story about the fight for reproductive justice in the United States by coming into community with other archival objects held at my library, but also regionally and nationally, that evidence previous chapters of this important history. It is because of the foresight of donors, like those from the Women Project, who see the value in saving evidentiary material of their advocacy, that these items are now going to be preserved and can no longer be erased, but rather they will be used as a foundation for the creation of new knowledge about our society and culture. Here are just a few paraphrased quotations, also on the subject of reproductive justice, from sister collections held at the Brown Library. The Women Project now has sister collections. The Women Project quilt and these items will now be in conversation for researchers as users can use them across the board. Here's one example, a little bit of a trigger warning on these. In 1971, a notable feminist scholar reflected in a diary that she later donated to our archive. She wrote, "Remember that time in 1968 when we, meaning her, when we traveled to London to get an abortion and I almost died?" Later, a group of women from the Brown class of 1967 recounted through an oral history recording about a similar story. "We passed the hat for a girl who lived on our floor. It was terrifying. She got sick, very sick, but we didn't want to get in trouble. One of our floor mates finally called for help. But illegal abortion made us feel like we were all complicit." In an oral history transcript, another group of women recalled their efforts during the 1980s to escort Rhode Island women into a Providence abortion clinic, passing through throngs of protesters. One woman shared, "I was scared out of my mind to see protesters tearing other people apart, tearing me apart and hassling people going into the clinic. The very first woman I escorted in burst into tears by the time I got her to the door. I guess I was just so impressed by how inhumane it was when the hecklers were doing this for what they considered a humane cause." It is these letters, diaries, oral histories, and signatures, including those on the Women Project quilt, that tell the story of people's lives in the United States before and after Roe. They tell the stories where people endured to control their own bodies and to save their own lives when American law subjugated and then abandoned them, and how the current threat of Roe being overturned feels to them, particularly as signers of the quilt look to their children and consider what could happen to them without the Reproductive Privacy Act in place. So as I join you this evening to welcome the Women Project, quilt into the Pembroke Center archives and subsequently share it with researchers all over the world through cataloging records, a collection guide, exhibits, in-class instruction, and more. I can speak not as an artist, but as an archivist. It is the evocative nature of each individual square multiplied by the immensity and visual power of the quilt as a whole and joined in community with other objects that truly enrich the understanding of the history of women in Rhode Island and the fight for reproductive justice in the United States. On behalf of my colleagues at the Pembroke Center and the John Hay Library, I want to thank the Women Project for trusting us with this important history. We are really thrilled to add it to the collection. Thank you.
So we have a special treat, and that is that one of the greatest champions of the bill, General Assembly Member Senator Gail Golden, is here with us tonight. And we asked her to do something maybe a little different than what she's used to talking about, and that is the perspective of a government official responding to the artists and the activism in the State House, perhaps in that different way that we talked about. So I invite Gail up to say a few words, and we'll wrap up after that. I would say to end in the form of a true Women Project / Hera Gallery event, we'd love to take a photograph of the group of us together up here so we can have it for Hera's next annual, not like a big review, retrospective to say this is where we were then. Anyway, thank you, Senator.
Good evening, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you and to learn so much about the Hera Gallery this evening, and also I've been inspired to develop my own language from seeing that.
Right?
Yeah, so we'll be working on that next. I have a few thoughts. One is to just really reinforce how incredibly important the activism and art that came through the Women Project was for the passage of the Reproductive Privacy Act in Rhode Island. So for all of you that were participating and involved in that, I'm deeply thankful. It made an incredible difference. Well, I was first elected in 2012, and I came into the Rhode Island Senate. There were 38 senators, and in 2012, 8 of us were pro-choice. So to get that bill passed was an extraordinary journey over a very short period of time. One of the first things I noticed when I came to the State House, how many people have been in the State House? Great, so it's a beautiful building, right? This is an extraordinary building. There is artwork everywhere in the building. Almost every single painting that hangs in the State House is of a white man. There are 2 sculptures of women in it, and there was one sculpture, I think, of Martin Luther King in it. And then the beautiful, stunning painting that is on the dome, it does have women in it as the painter's wife, but those are the only images of women in the State House. And that really struck me when I came in 2012, and it also struck me because almost all the people in the State House were white men, and that women's voices were missing both visually in the art representation in that building, and who was actually in conversation with us. So almost all the lobbyists in the State House were men, the majority of the legislators are men. It was a very different world than the world I had come from in working in the nonprofit sector and for a feminist funder before coming into the State House. So it was very different for me, and it was one of the things I really noticed. And flash forward to a couple of years of the Women Project being out there, what we saw was this very different energy, and it wasn't just about the amount of people and voices coming in, but it was the perception of the activism that was happening. Jocelyn talked about some of the actions that happened in the State House, and those were really important because I think in many ways they challenged people's assumptions of what activism was. So I remember there was one day when the sewing machines were set up outside of the Senate chamber, and some of my colleagues were like, why are there sewing machines here? Well, you know, we gotta work on the quilt sometime. And this idea that you would take what is traditionally viewed as women's work and turn it into an act of activism that was questioning and really pressuring the patriarchy to take action was pretty significant. There was another moment later into the Senate session last year where knitters started coming out and sitting. People just started sitting in our hearings in the Senate. In the audience, weren't coming up to testify. And if any of you, anybody in this room, were you one of the knitters? There were people who came up and just sat there and knit. And I think it must be part of the quilt knitting that's out there, right? And there were senators who said to me, why are those women sitting in the audience knitting? I'm like, well, we're certainly not doing our job, so they're just watching us, you know, to wait until we get to the point where we're gonna actually vote on this bill. And if that means they have to come up here and knit and make you pay attention to our inaction by their action, that's one of the ways that they're really making a statement. So it was a really, a vastly different way than what normally happens at the State House to have conversations. And it was a really an opportunity to engage my colleagues in conversations about the bill in a way that I don't normally do, because normally that's not what's going on. So it was both, to me, the activism for the bill, but also a way to bring in new people into the State House and be able to experience being part of all of the advocacy and slight amount of chaos in the State House, and to make sure that you got your voices heard by trying all different ways of doing it and really engaging people in those conversations. So very thankful for all of you that did it, very thankful to the Women Project and the women who first started off with, I think the first thing was really the postcards, that Mara designed postcards in that first year that were stunning, beautiful pieces of art that got mailed to legislators in the State House that really stood out and made people sort of question what was going on. It was not what the kind of thing that we normally got, even though it was postcards, which is something we normally get. But so there have been just lots of actions along the way, and I so look forward to what is going to continue to happen and ways that we can continue to engage artists in the activism of the State House. So we'll wrap it up by maybe we need to turn up the lights. And I would say that a true Woman Project finale would be to let you know that we're fundraising for an event where 50 folks are going to be going to the Washington, D.C. rally in defense of Roe, which is March 4th. We have a full flight of people going. We're really close to fundraising for it. We're going to have t-shirts, so if you want to donate, we brought some. But I think it's inappropriate to be buying and selling here at this institution. So if you want to donate to the Woman Project, I think that's legal. But anyway, we would love to do this photograph though. Again, when you walk up into the entrance, when you're coming into the show, there's a wonderful picture of Hera members and visitors for an exhibition. I forget what show it was. Do you remember? And it was awesome because we were just taking these photographs of people at different events. So that's what we want to do again today. Okay. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for all